Well, you know, this ain't exactly a great spot. I know of a couple others where I could be parked literally right at the edge of the water, but that's a bit of a drive out of my way, and I've only got about 40 minutes to kill before my last job of the evening, and I don't really want to drive halfway across the city to those locations. And there's a spot up the river here across the downtown where they actually converted an old railroad trestle to a footbridge where you can walk out and sit, and they got benches and stuff out there, so you can go out there and sit and overlook the river. Now, this is, for you that don't know what you're looking at, this is the Des Moines River. It is a medium-sized river that connects up with the Mississippi somewhere south of Keokuk or near Keokuk, Iowa, in or around the vicinity of the area bordering Missouri. Now, I could be a little bit off on that. It also travels quite a bit upriver and connects with many smaller rivers coming down out of Minnesota, and pretty much the entire river basin, I guess, that for southern Minnesota and central Iowa dumps into this river. Historically speaking, 100 plus years ago, all out time about 1860s, 1850s, so I guess more than 100 years ago, the river was actually at certain times of the year high enough that steamboat traffic could make it as far up to Des Moines, and maybe a little further north, but usually it stopped at Des Moines, and it was a very risky endeavor, and you only did it like I said, in the early spring when the waters were high, so there was only a window of a couple months there that was really viable. Anything after that was taking your chances. So most of the riverboat traffic stopped in southern Iowa, down along the Mississippi, or up along eastern Iowa along the Mississippi River. So why am I talking about a river? Well, not too long ago, Rob Gusserson and I did a series of videos on the topics of rules often discarded or ignored. And I know that there's a trend, or has been a small trend in some aspects, of people who have done away with the concept of skill sets and or do a wink and a nod, because I don't want to disrupt the game flow. Well, okay, if your game flow is 100% storyline based, where everybody's collaborating to write a novel, well then, okie dokie. But for the lion's share of people who are playing a game, and this is part of the game. 40 years, my friend, 40 years it's been part of the game. You might want to deny it, you might want to poo-poo it, you might want to flip your fingers off at it. You're more than entitled to. One of the questions we recently did for RPG A Day for 2018 was, question 20. Which game mechanic inspires your play the most? Okay, that's a bit of a dodgy question because there's no right or wrong answer to it. So my answer and your answer and 40 other people's answers are all correct. Nobody's going to debate that. Now, I'm looking at a modest-sized river currently in the middle of being lower than usual or lower than normal. If we had looked at this river 2 months ago with all the heavy rains and stuff that we had up north, this river would be 4 or 5 feet higher up on that bank. You can somewhat see across the way the gray line, water line there, where the river's been receding. So you can actually see that wasn't too long ago, it was a couple feet higher than it is now. So that being said, it's not, 50 feet? Maybe 50 feet, 100 feet, depending on where you're at, to cross. It's not heavy. It's not running fast. There's not a bunch of rapids here. Although, I guess here in a couple years, this whole stretch of river is going to take a major transformation, because the city intends to revitalize or revamp this whole thing that turned it into a kayaker's heaven or something. There's going to be little man-made islands out there and some artificial rapids and things like that, which is supposed to inspire more river use, more water use of the city, and have yet another reason for living in the city of Des Moines, which is not a bad thing. I mean, it's just like to my right, which I'm not going to pan the camera around because it'd be a pain in my backside, but there's a dog park. Now, 10 years ago, there wasn't a dog park. It was actually just a grassy area because the main post office is on the other side of the dog park. And this particular stretch of road, which is now blocked off at the down end, I'll have to back up and turn around here and get out of here, which is not a big deal with my truck. Nothing else, I just back straight up. The road has been closed off, so it's purposely designed so you can't come down here and drive the loop, because people used to come down here to do nefarious stuff back in the day. Anyway, we're back to that question: why am I talking about a river, and what has this got to do with skill sets? Okay, I'm saying this right here, where I'm looking at right now, is an expert, excellent challenge for an adventure. Your group of PCs come across 100 of these things in a given year as they crisscross back and forth around the campaign maps and the worlds that we create, or the worlds that we choose to play in, and they have to find ways to cross these things. And you can make the argument, well, they're veteran players, they've been doing this so long, they can walk on water. Okay, it's your game. Far be it from me to call that absurd, even though it's absurd. Now, if you have magic abilities, there's a number of magic skills that help deal with this kind of obstacle. This is a challenge. This is a skill set challenge, in my opinion. There are no real feats that will master the river. There are some that will help you get across it better, or better stamina, and increase your swimming ability, how much you can do this, that, and the other thing. But there's still a challenge here. Do we create a raft? Do we float our stuff over? We're going to swim over. Do you know how to swim? Do you have any skills, any sets of points in that sort of ability? Well, I've got high agility. I got high dexterity. I got high constitution. Okay, fine. So you've done away with the skill sets, things like climb and swim and so on and so forth. Great. Meanwhile, this is still a challenge. It's going to take some stamina. It's going to take some agility, some dexterity to get across. If your average fighter is 200 pounds and he's carrying 150 pounds of gear, 2/3 of which is metal, so even magic metal can sink. It's not designed for amphibious use unless you got some very, very specialized magic armor. It's subject to rust. The undergarments, your leather goods, most of your regular equipment, all going to suffer some kind of derogatory, abuse for regularly crossing things like these rivers. And if you're in an area that has lots of them, this is going to be a compounded thing. I mean, you don't have to have that adventure every single time they cross the river, but giving them a taste of it, making them actually work for to get across, make them actually make the effort to cross as an adventurer, as among your sessions, an encounter with the river crossing. Not every river has a convenient shallow area that you can ford the river. This particular river has none within 100 miles of here. There are no shallow spots. There are plenty of sandbars, hidden sandbars, but there are very deep channels out here because this is an old river and it's been managed by mankind for a better part of 75 years now. So the channels have gotten increasingly deeper where they're at because we don't let the river move. The river stays pretty much inside these high banks. And whenever they manage to get over the bank, we build the banks higher. That's one of the reasons why this area down here doesn't have housing or a lot of businesses, because it's prone to floods. So better to leave it as a green space than to have all that high expense of trying to repair all the damage from flooded building, or what that flooding can do. So we got an individual or a party of individuals who have collectively a couple tons of gear amongst them. Perhaps they've got some animals. If they got the right kind of animals, well, horses, mules, that kind of stuff can swim. and you can't send them across fully loaded, but you can send them partially loaded. You can create a raft. You could, this river's not so far apart, you know, maybe it's a little more than 50 feet, could be 100 feet here. It's hard for me to judge distance. It could be well within one person crossing and setting up a rope and then relaying your stuff across. Whether you do it with a couple ropes and you hang stuff from the ropes and you drag them across and try to keep it out of the water. But this is time intensive. This is something that would probably take several hours or a better part of a good chunk of travel time on an average day, just getting across this one obstacle. And challenge from the swimming perspective, of the endurance perspective, of your encumbrance perspective. You know, weather can play a role. If you want to throw in the weather as being a very bad day for crossing the river, like I said, come back in the spring when this thing's 3-4 feet higher than it is and moving 3 times faster. And you got big chunks of wood and trees and stuff floating down the river. A lot of opportunities for things to go wrong. So I think this makes a great encounter. And I've used over the years this sort of thing several times. And it's of my opinion, seeing these things visually, it's the same thing when Rob described his experience of going into a formerly working mine and experiencing what firsthand that's like. Like I said, when I was younger, I went down in a number of caverns, and some of them were dry caverns, some of them were wet. One you had to take boats into, little John boats. Others were cold and slimy, and they were not comfortable. And I tried to imagine trying to get through the unworked portions of these cavern systems where the floors are not flat, they're not even, they're not compacted, they're not designed for people to travel across or through, let alone coming to the areas where you'd have to flatten yourself out and army crawl your way through a passage, dragging your stuff behind you or pushing it ahead of you. We don't do that sort of thing in most of our dungeon crawls. We usually give them conveniently formed, conveniently widened, conveniently leveled, construction savvy tunnel systems that's not that big of a challenge. I think one more reason why we had the skill sets in the early days, to give us those challenges, to encourage us to think that way, and having to experience those things in the real world, give you that opportunity to express them as a GM to your players. This, while seemingly a modest challenge, is a big challenge. I'm trying to envision myself and a group of my friends with whatever we carried over here on our backs, deciding we want to get from this side of the river to that side of the river. And obviously we can't go across a bridge down here because in this hypothetical situation, there's no bridges to cross. So, fortunately, aside from the fish and occasional snapping turtle, there's nothing really violent down there that's going to eat you. You don't have to worry about that. You do have to worry about possibility of undertows and hidden obstructions. Like I said, there's a number of trees that laying at the bottom of this river that make their way slowly downstream over the years or rot away where they've gotten lodged. In this case, there's actually just right up around the bend here, there's about a dozen railroad cars sunk in the river at the bend where a bridge went down or something for 60, 70 years ago. I don't remember the exact date on it, but they're still there. There's still obstructions. So there could be other constructs that you might find in your river as a challenge. My friends and I would have to figure out how to make a raft. Now, I've never built a raft. I mean, honestly, I've never sat down and purposely tried to build a raft. How long would that take? How much of a day would I have to spend finding the right kind of wood, cutting them to length, figuring out how to lash them together? You know, a couple of crude logs together will give you a flotation device, but that doesn't really make a raft. So you could really get cheesy or cheap. That's a matter of your players. If your players go that route, hey, that's just part of the adventure. At the end of the day, at the end of the story, at the end of the session, the end of our story, they're going to have something that they could say we achieved, we accomplished. It didn't involve murder hoboing our way across. Because I can guarantee you can fire all the arrows you want, launch as many fireballs as you want, hack at that river with your axe as much as you want. It's not going to bother it one bit. So, food for thought.